for the hardest-hitting show in talk radio. The true progressive voice since 2012. This is Southpaws.
Welcome to Southpaws on the Pacifica Radio Network. We are the leaders of the revolution. I'm Darren Gibson, your host today. We got a lot of stuff to talk about, including the vice presidential debate between Tim Walz and JD Vance. I unfortunately did not watch it. I was a little on the tired side yesterday, so I went to bed early. I saw a little bit of the pre-coverage of the debate, and I decided, well, I'm just going to go to bed. I'll get the details in the morning, and that's pretty much what I've done today. So we got to definitely talk about JD Vance's, well, you guys aren't supposed to fact check me quote. That's really something to say. There's going to be a lot of things going on. Conflict in the Middle East, that's escalating. We have to talk about Hurricane Helene, was tropical storm. It upgraded to a hurricane when it hit Asheville, North Carolina. We got to talk about that. That is amazing stuff, and not good amazing. So we'll talk about that. As we mentioned on last week's show, I've got to talk about Ottawa County, Michigan's Board of Commissioners basically rejecting a $900,000 grant because of the word COVID. This is dumb on top of dumb already, and I'm just going to call out the stupidity going on in Ottawa County. Trump's not going to participate in a 60 Minutes interview, so we'll talk about that. If we've got time, we'll talk about the Pennsylvania County manager sued over plans to end the use of drop boxes for mail-in ballots, so we'll talk about that if we have time. Before we get started with today's topics, a couple of reminders. You can follow us on social media by going to facebook.com/Southpaws Radio Show. You can follow us on X at Southpaws Radio. You can follow us on Tumblr at southpawsradioshow.tumblr.com. You can follow us on YouTube and Mastodon by doing a search for Southpaws Radio. You can become a patron of the show by going to patreon.com/Southpaws Radio. You can listen to the show anytime at Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Podcast Addict, Podvine, and Pandora by doing a search for Southpaws. Once you found our logo, you found us. We send links to our weekly episodes to our Facebook, X, Tumblr, YouTube, and Mastodon accounts. You can listen to us on Global Community Radio Channel 1 every Saturday night at 11 Eastern, and you can listen to us on great Pacifica stations, including KCEI in Taos, New Mexico. So be sure to listen to us on your local Pacifica affiliate. If they're not carrying us, please ask them to do so very nicely. We would greatly appreciate that. We are recording the show on Wednesday, October the 2nd, 2024. It's the day after the vice presidential debate. We've got coverage of it from the Associated Press. This is Bill Barrow, Zeke Miller, and Nicholas Riccardi writing for them. This is dated October 2nd out of Washington. Vice presidential hopefuls Tim Walz and JD Vance focused their criticism on the top of the ticket on Tuesday as they engaged in a policy-heavy discussion that may be the last debate of the 2024 presidential campaign. It was the first encounter between Minnesota's Democratic governor and Ohio's Republican senator, following last month's debate between Vice President Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Again, the Associated Press refers to Donald Trump as former president. We don't do that on this show. It comes just 5 weeks before Election Day, and as millions of voters are now able to cast early ballots. Tuesday's confrontation played out as the stakes of the contest rose again after Iran fired missiles into Israel, while a devastating hurricane and potentially debilitating port strike roiled the country at home. Over and again, Walz and Vance outlined the policy and character differences between their running mates while trying to introduce themselves to the country. Here are some of the takeaways from Tuesday's debate. Iran's ballistic missile attack on Israel on Tuesday elicited a contrast between the Democratic and Republican tickets on foreign policy. Walz promised steady leadership under Harris, while Vance pledged to return to peace through strength if Trump is returned to the White House. The differing visions of what American leadership should look like overshadowed the sharp policy differences between the two tickets. The Iranian threat to the region and U.S. interests around the world opened the debate, with Walz pivoting the topic to criticism of Trump. Walz said, quote, "What's fundamental here is that steady leadership is going to matter," end of quote. He then referenced the nearly 80-year-old Donald Trump talking about crowd sizes and responding to global crises by tweet. So there you go there. Vance, for his part, promised to return to effective deterrence under Trump against Iran, brushing back on Walz's criticism of Trump by attacking Harris and her role in the Biden administration. He said, quote, "Who has been the vice president for the last 3.5 years? And the answer is your running mate, not mine," end of quote. Here's the thing, and I'm going to say this right here, right now, because I hear this criticism, I see this criticism on social media. The point of the matter is, who's been president for the last 3.5 years? Not Kamala Harris, it's been Joe Biden. And Kamala Harris is not Joe Biden. Period, end of story. Vance pointed notedly that the Hamas attacks on Israel on October 7th, 2023 happened, quote, "during the administration of Kamala Harris." I'm going to tell you that is not true. That happened during the administration of Joe Biden. Again, Kamala Harris is not Joe Biden. So Vance is full of bullshit. Vance and Walz traded the bulk of their attacks not on their onstage rivals, but on the running mates who weren't in the room. Both vice presidential nominees sought to convey a general meaning as they've lobbied criticism at Harris and Trump respectively. It was a reflection of the fact that most voters don't cast a ballot based on the vice president and on a vice presidential nominee's historic role in serving as the attack dog for their running mates. Walz pointedly attacked Trump for failing to meet his pledge of building a physical barrier across the entire U.S.-Mexico border at the country's southern neighbor's expense. Walz said less than 2% of that wall got built and Mexico didn't pay a dime, end of quote. Underscoring the focus on the top of the ticket during a back and forth about immigration, Vance said to his opponent, quote, "I think that you want to solve this problem, but I don't think that Kamala Harris does," end of quote. In an age of world-class disses optimized for social media, Tuesday's debate was a detour into substance. Both candidates took a low-key approach and both enthusiastically delved into the minutiae. Walz dug into the drafting of the Affordable Care Act when he was in the House in 2009 and pushed Vance on the senator's claim that Trump, who tried to eliminate the law, actually helped preserve it. Vance, defending his claim that illegal immigration pushes up housing prices, cited a Federal Reserve study to back himself up. Let me stop there. The fact of the matter is that housing prices are going up because of speculators on Wall Street. Period. End of story. 1 in every 4 homes are now owned by hedge funds and Wall Street. There you go, folks. That's the truth. Walz talked about how Minneapolis tinkered with local regulations to boost the housing supply. Both men talked about the overlap between energy policy, trade, and climate change. It was a very different style than often seen in presidential debates over the past several election cycles. Walz pounced on Vance repeatedly over abortion access and reproductive rights as the Ohio senator tried to argue that a state-by-state matrix of abortion laws is the ideal approach for the United States. Walz countered that a basic right for a woman should not be determined by geography. Walz said, quote, "This is a very simple proposition. These are women's decisions. We trust women. We trust doctors," end of quote. Walz sought to personalize the issue by referencing the death of Amber Thurman, who waited more than 20 hours at the hospital for a routine medical procedure known as a D&C to clear out remaining tissue after taking abortion pills. She developed sepsis and died. Rather than sidestep the reference, Vance at one point agreed with Walz that, quote, Amber Thurman should still be alive, end of quote. Vance steered the conversation to the GOP's tickets proposals he said would help women and children economically, thus avoiding the need for terminating pregnancies. But Walz retorted that such policies, tax credits, expanded child care, a more even economy, can be pursued while still allowing women to make their own decisions about abortion. Let me add that it has been the Republicans that have been against tax credits, expanded child care aid, etc., etc. There's your truth. In the wake of the devastation of Hurricane Helene, Vance took a question about climate change and gave an answer about jobs in manufacturing, taking a detour around Trump's past claims that global warming is a hoax. Vance contended that the best way to fight climate change was to move more manufacturing to the United States because the country has the world's cleanest energy economy. It was a distinctly domestic spin on a global crisis, especially after Trump pulled the U.S. out of the International Paris Climate Accords during his administration. Walz also kept the climate change-focused domestic, touting the Biden administration's renewable energy investments as well as record levels of oil and natural gas production. It was a decidedly optimistic take on a pervasive and grim global problem. The two running mates agreed that the number of migrants in the U.S. illegally is a problem, but each laid the blame on the opposing presidential nominee. Vance echoed Trump by repeatedly calling Harris the border czar. Let me stop there. Kamala Harris is not the border czar. She never was, she never will be, because there was no position as border czar. That is a Republican talking point, and that's all that it is. Vance suggested that she, as vice president, single-handedly rolled back the immigration restrictions Trump had imposed as president. The result in Vance's telling is an unchecked flow of fentanyl, strain on state and local resources, and increased housing prices across the country. Once again, I'm going to remind everybody here, housing prices are because of Wall Street investing in housing. That is a period, end of story to that. Supply and demand, folks, supply and demand. When you take supply out of the equation and there's still demand, there's going to be higher prices. Period. End of story. Harris was never asked to be the border czar, and she was never specifically given the responsibility for security on the border. She was tasked by Biden in March of 2021 with tackling the root causes of migration from the Central American countries of Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, and pushing leaders there and in Mexico to enforce immigration laws. Harris was not empowered to set U.S. immigration policy. Only the president can sign executive orders, and Harris was not empowered as Biden's proxy in negotiations with Congress on immigration law. Once again, who was president? It was not Harris. It was Biden. That's simple. Walz advanced Democrats' arguments that Trump single-handedly killed a bipartisan Senate deal to tighten border security and boost the processing system for immigrants and asylum seekers. That is the truth. It was Trump who did this. It was Trump who killed the bipartisan Senate deal. It wasn't Biden. It wasn't Harris. It was Donald John Trump. Period. End of story. Republicans backed off the deal, Walz noted, only after Trump said it wasn't good enough. That, again, is the truth. Asked directly whether Trump's promise to deport millions of illegal immigrants would remove parents of U.S.-born children, Vance never answered the question. Instead, the senator tried to put his best spin on Trump's plan to use the military to help with deportations and pivot to attacking Harris for a porous border. Asked to respond to Trump's having called climate change a hoax, Vance also avoided a response. The debate kicked off with Walz being asked if he'd support a preemptive strike by Israel against Iran. Walz praised Harris's foreign policy leadership but never answered that question either. At the end of the debate, Vance would not answer Walz's direct question of whether Trump indeed lost the 2020 election. Walz had several verbal stumbles on a night in which he admitted to misspeaking often. In the debate's opening moments, he confused Iran and Israel when discussing the Middle East. At one point, he said he had become friends with school shooters, and he stumbled through an explanation of inaccurate remarks about whether he was in Hong Kong during the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre. AP said he was not, but we have a better explanation of it. He was there either before or after the Tiananmen Square massacre, so there you go. But the governor noticeably put Vance on the defensive over abortion and near the end of the debate with a pointed question about whether Trump won the 2020 election. The candidates went out of their way to be polite to each other until the very end, when Vance refused to back down from his statements that he wouldn't have certified Trump's 2020 election loss. Vance tried to turn the issue to claims that the, quote, much bigger threat to democracy, end of quote, was Democrats trying to censor people on social media, but Walz wouldn't let go. Noting that he'd just been praising some of Vance's answers, Walz said, quote, this one is troubling to me, end of quote. He rattled off the ways Trump tried to overturn his 2020 loss and noted that the candidate still insists he won that contest. Then Walz asked Vance if Trump actually lost the election. Vance responded by asking if Harris censored people. Walz said, quote, that is a damning non-answer, end of quote. Walz also noted that Trump's former Vice President Mike Pence wasn't on the debate stage because he stood up to Trump on January 6, 2021 and presided over Congress's certification of Donald Trump's loss. Walz concluded, quote, America, I think you've got a really clear choice on this election of who's going to honor that democracy and who's going to honor Donald Trump, end of quote. Hey, he hit the mark there. He really did. Most of the pundits say that the debate was tied. On that motion, I'm going to score it for Walz because he hit the knockout blow with that. That was the knockout blow right at the very end. But there's troubles on the horizon for whoever becomes president. I have this story. This is Amer Madani, Zeke Miller, and Thomas Beaumont writing for the Associated Press. This is dated October 2nd. A trio of new trials, a devastating hurricane, expanding conflict in the Mideast, and a dock worker strike that threatens the U.S. economy are looming over the final weeks of the presidential campaign and could help shape the public mood as voters decide between Democrat Kamala Harris and Republican Donald Trump. How events shake out and how the candidates respond could be decisive as they claw for votes in battleground states. The sitting president, Joe Biden, is still the steward of a U.S. economy and foreign policy at this tumultuous moment and may well bear ultimate responsibility for how they play out. But how Harris and Trump approach the three disparate issues could have rippling impact on how Americans perceive their two choices this November. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre told reporters on Tuesday, quote, unfortunately, there are going to be events like this, and this is where you see the leadership of a president show up. I think this should send a message to Americans. It matters. It matters who sits behind the resolute desk, end of quote. Harris, with Biden's help, is trying to display steady calm as a flurry of difficult problems arise all at once. She and Biden on Tuesday toggled between directing Hurricane Helene recovery and rescue response work and huddling with aides in the White House Situation Room to watch as the U.S. helped Israel defend against a massive attack by Iran in retaliation for the killing of Tehran-backed leaders of Lebanese Hezbollah. All the while, they were keeping close contact with economic advisors as dock workers took to the picket line Tuesday, a walkout stretching from ports in Maine to Texas that threatens to snarl the supply chains and cause shortages and higher prices if it stretches on for more than a few weeks. Trump, for his part, lashed out at Harris as in over her head, while claiming that this sort of crush of problems would never have happened under his watch. At a campaign event in Wisconsin, Trump said, quote, we have been talking about World War III, and I don't want to make predictions. The whole world is laughing at us. That's why Israel was under attack just a little while ago, because they don't respect our country anymore, end of quote. Bullshit! They're laughing at you, Donnie. They laugh at you, you orange. Yet voters cast Trump aside 4 years ago in large part because of how they viewed his handling of the swirling economic, social, and public health challenges that emerged from the COVID-19 pandemic. Biden, in comments to reporters before meeting with aides Tuesday to discuss the ongoing hurricane response, seemed to acknowledge the growing frustration with the federal response to the massive storm. Biden said, quote, "I've been in frequent contact with the governors and other leaders in the impacted areas, and we have to jumpstart this recovery process," end of quote. He will travel to the Carolinas Wednesday to get a closer look at the hurricane devastation. He is also expected to visit hurricane-impacted areas in Georgia and Florida later this week. He said, quote, "People are scared to death. People wonder whether they're going to make it," end of quote. Harris, meanwhile, is headed to Georgia on Wednesday and North Carolina in the coming days to do the same. Tuesday's vice presidential debate offered a sampling of how the two campaigns were reacting to new developments to bolster their own messages and sharpen their attacks on their rivals. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz promised steady leadership under Harris, while Ohio Senator JD Vance pledged a return to peace through strength if Trump is returned to the White House. Biden has stayed off the campaign trail since announcing in July that he was ending his re-election effort amid sliding public approval ratings. His conspicuous absence underscores that Democrats see him as more of a liability than an asset in making the case for Harris. That is according to Christopher Borick, director of the Muhlenberg College Institute of Public Opinion in Pennsylvania. But how well Biden deals with the three latest emergency situations could have a big impact in how undecided voters perceive Harris in these final days. Borick said, quote, "President Biden can't help Kamala Harris on the stump, but in a campaign when you are turning over every rock in a few states to get that undecided voter, how he manages these crises over the next several weeks could have an impact," end of quote. The Harris campaign understands the risks it faces with multiple crises converging all at once, especially given their varied and unpredictable nature. A prolonged strike, a bungled disaster response, or a further expansion of Middle East conflict could raise doubts about Biden's leadership and, by extension, that of his second-in-command. At the same time, Harris campaign aides believe the perilous moments presents an opportunity to demonstrate to voters the stakes of who's in the job and the seriousness with which they approach it, according to campaign officials who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss internal thinking. Trump, in a speech in Waunakee, Wisconsin, and in social media postings Tuesday, offered a mixture of prayer and concern for those impacted by Helene, jabs at Harris for the dock workers' strike, and an aside about the casting of Stanley Kubrick's film Full Metal Jacket. In a statement about the strike, Trump said, quote, "The situation should have never come to this. Had I been president, it would not have," end of quote. Bullshit! You are a scab. That's why you say that, Donnie. Oh, repeat after me, folks. Donald Trump's a scab. Donald Trump's a scab. You'll find that out on Sunday when Bernie Sanders joins Sean Fain in Grand Rapids at Rosa Parks Circle for a campaign speech. And I'm hoping to be there to cover it for Pacifica Radio. So if anybody's got an in for me to get press passes, please let me know. Donald Trump's a scab. Period. End of story. Harris aides made a point of having the vice president deliver brief remarks on the Iranian attack Tuesday in between taping interviews for her campaign, aiming to portray her as ready to take command. Late-term tumult has been fixture in American presidential politics, sometimes in the forms of scandal and other times with an incumbent hoping to demonstrate that he or his preferred successor would be a steady head at an uncertain time. George W. Bush pushed a rescue package through Congress to stabilize a reeling financial system by creating the Troubled Asset Relief Program, or TARP, amid fears that the economy was on the verge of collapse. The broader economic conditions didn't help Republican John McCain in the race he lost to Barack Obama. Jimmy Carter's re-election campaign in 1980 was paralyzed by the Iran hostage crisis. 52 hostages were released on January 20th, 1981, soon after his successor, Ronald Reagan, was inaugurated. That is because the Reagan campaign cut a deal with Iran while still campaigning. That is proof positive, period, end of story. Lyndon Johnson announced a halting of bombings in North Vietnam days before the 1968 election, a step he hoped would bring the conflict toward a peace settlement. But the South Vietnamese indicated they would not negotiate, and Johnson's vice president, Hubert Humphrey, lost narrowly to Republican Richard Nixon. Once again, the Nixon campaign was caught on tape working a deal with the North and South Vietnamese to come together on this. And the reason that Johnson couldn't go forward through with exposing Nixon was because the recording was made as the result of an illegal wiretap. That's why he couldn't expose Nixon. We've talked about that previously on this very show. You won't hear it pretty much anywhere else. Edward France, a University of Indianapolis historian, said, quote, "The efforts by incumbents to help themselves or their party's nominee with October surprises go back quite a ways. In this current climate, I'm not sure how many voters can be persuaded by a candidate this late in the game trying to show competency." End of quote. Which that would be Donald Trump trying to show competency. Talking about the casting of Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket. I did not have that on my bingo card this year. Sorry, I didn't. All right, let's get to our next story talking about Hurricane Helene. This is Cedar Atanasio and Jonathan Matisse writing for the Associated Press. This is dated October 2nd out of Nashville, Tennessee. Tennessee state authorities said Wednesday they are investigating the company behind a plastics factory where 11 workers were swept away by flooding from the remnants of Hurricane Helene. As the nearby Nolichucky River swelled from rainfall, employees in the Impact Plastics Factory in Irwin, a small community in rural Tennessee, kept working. Several asserted that they weren't allowed to leave in time to avoid the storm's impact. It wasn't until water flooded into the parking lot and the power went out that the plant shut down and sent workers home. Several never made it. The raging water swept 11 people away and only 5 were rescued. 2 of them are confirmed dead and are part of a toll across 6 states that has surpassed 160. 4 others in the factory are still missing since they were washed away Friday in Irwin, where dozens of people were also rescued off the roof of a hospital. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation spokesperson Leslie Earhart said Wednesday that the agency is investigating allegations involving Impact Plastics at the direction of the local prosecutor. District Attorney Stephen R. Finney said in a statement that he asked the Bureau to look into any potential criminal violations related to the occurrences on Friday. Some workers managed to drive away from the plant while others got caught on a clogged road where water rose high enough to sweep vehicles away. Videos show the brown floodwaters covering the nearby highway and lapping at the doors of Impact Plastics. Jacob Ingram, a mold changer at the factory, filmed himself and 4 others waiting for rescue as bobbing vehicles floated by. He later posted the videos on Facebook with the caption, "Just want to say I'm lucky to be alive." Videos of the helicopter rescue were posted on social media later Saturday. In one video, Ingram looks down at the camera, a green Tennessee National Guard helicopter hovering above him, hoisting one of the other survivors. In another, a soldier rigs the next evacuee in a harness. Impact Plastics said in a statement Monday that it, quote, continued to monitor weather conditions, end of quote, Friday, and that managers dismissed employees, quote, when water began to cover the parking lot and the adjacent service road and the plant lost power, end of quote. In interviews with local news outlets, 2 of the workers who made it out of the facility disputed those claims. One told WCYB television that employees were made to wait until it was too late. Another, Ingram, made a similar statement to the Knoxville News-Sentinel newspaper. Ingram said, quote, "They should have evacuated when we got the flash flood warnings and when they saw the parking lot. We asked them if we should evacuate, and they told us not yet. It wasn't bad enough." End of quote. Worker Robert Jarvis told WCYB television that the company should have let them leave earlier. Jarvis said he tried to drive away in his car, but the water on the main road got too high and only off-road vehicles were finding ways out of the flood zone. He said, quote, "The water was coming up. A guy in a 4x4 came, picked a bunch of us up, and saved our lives, or we'd have been dead too." End of quote. The 11 workers found temporary respite on the back of a truck driven by a passerby, but it soon tipped over after debris hit it, Ingram said. Ingram added that he survived by grabbing onto plastic pipes that were on the truck. He said he and 4 others floated for about a half mile before they found safety on a sturdy pile of debris. Company founder Gerald O'Connor said in the statement Monday, quote, "We are devastated by the tragic loss of great employees. Those who are missing or deceased and their families are in our thoughts and prayers." End of quote. Really? Yeah, that's why you didn't let them leave when they should have. Jesus Christ. This founder of this company should be prosecuted for murder. The 2 confirmed dead at the Tennessee plastics factory are Mexican citizens. That is according to Lisa Sherman Nicholas, executive director at the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition. She said many of the victims' families have started online fundraisers to cover funeral costs and other expenses. Bertha Mendoza was with her sister when the flooding started, but they got separated, according to a eulogy on her GoFundMe page authored by her daughter-in-law, who declined an interview request. The eulogy read, quote, "She was loved dearly by her family, community, her church family, and co-workers." End of quote. Yeah. The guy that owns Impact Plastics should be prosecuted heavily for murder. Not involuntary manslaughter, murder. This was preventable. Let me right now get to our next story. This is Eric Verduzco, Jeff Amy, and Kimberly Crucy writing for the Associated Press. This is dated October 2nd out of Swannanoa, North Carolina. Many residents of the Carolinas still lacked running water, cell phone service, and electricity Wednesday as rescuers searched for people unaccounted for after Hurricane Helene caused catastrophic damage across the southeast and killed at least 166 people. President Joe Biden will survey the devastation in the 2 states as floodwaters receded and revealed more of the death and destruction left in Helene's path. More than 1.2 million customers still had no power Wednesday in the Carolinas and Georgia, where Helene tore far inland after initial landfall on Florida's Gulf Coast. Some residents cooked food on charcoal grills or hiked to high ground in the hopes of finding a signal to let loved ones know they are alive. Estimating it will cost billions, Biden said Tuesday, quote, "We have to jumpstart this recovery process. People are scared to death. This is urgent." End of quote. While Biden is in the Carolinas, Vice President Kamala Harris will be in neighboring Georgia. Cadaver dogs and search crews trudged through knee-deep muck and debris in the mountains of western North Carolina looking for more victims. At least 57 people were killed in Buncombe County alone, home to the city of Asheville, a tourism haven known for its art galleries, breweries, and outdoor activities. In small Swannanoa outside Asheville, receding floodwaters revealed cars stacked on top of others and mobile homes that had floated away. Sinkholes pockmarked roads caked with mud and debris. Cliff Stewart survived 2 feet of water that poured into his home, topping the wheels on his wheelchair and sending his medicine bottles floating. Left without electricity and relying on food drop-offs from friends, he has refused offers to help him leave. The Marine Corps veteran said, quote, "Where am I going to go? This is all I've got. I just don't want to give it up because what am I going to do? Be homeless? I'd rather die here than live homeless." End of quote. Across the border in East Tennessee, a caravan, including Governor Bill Lee surveying damage outside the town of Irwin, drove by a crew pulling 2 bodies from the wreckage, a grim reminder that the rescue and recovery operations are still very much ongoing and the death toll is likely to rise. In Augusta, Georgia, Sherry Brown converted power from her car's alternator to keep her refrigerator running. She'd been taking bird baths with water collected in coolers. In another part of the city, people waited in line more than 3 hours to get water from one of 5 centers set up to serve more than 200,000 people. More than 150,000 households have registered for assistance with the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and that number is expected to rise rapidly in the coming days. That is according to agency representative Frank Matangra. Nearly 2 million ready-to-eat meals and more than 1 million liters of water have been sent to the hardest-hit areas, he said. The storm unleashed the worst flooding in a century in North Carolina, dumping more than 2 feet of rain in places. The administration of Governor Roy Cooper said Tuesday that more than 24 water plants remain closed. Active duty U.S. military units may be needed to assist the long-term recovery, he said, adding that Biden had given the green light to mobilizing military assets soon. A section of one of the region's main arteries, Interstate 40, reopened Tuesday after a mudslide was cleared, but a collapsed stretch near North Carolina's border with Tennessee remained closed. Residents and business owners wore masks and gloves while clearing debris Tuesday in Hot Springs, North Carolina, where almost every building along the main street was heavily damaged. Sarah Calloway, who owns the deli and gourmet store Vast Riviere Provisions, said the storm arrived frighteningly quickly. She helped fill sandbags the night before, but they turned out to be useless. The water rose so rapidly that even though she and others were in an apartment on an upper floor, she feared they would not be safe. They called to request a rescue from a swift water team. She said, quote, "It was really challenging to watch how quickly it rose up and then just to watch whole buildings floating down the river. It was something I can't even describe," end of quote. In the Black Mountain Mobile Home Park in Swannanoa, Karina Ramos and Ezekiel Bianchi were overwhelmed by the damage. The couple, their children, and dog fled in the pre-dawn darkness on Friday as the Swannanoa River's rapidly rising waters began flooding the bottom end of the park. By then, trees blocked the roads and the couple abandoned their 3 vehicles, all of which flooded. Ramos said, quote, "We left everything because we were panicking," end of quote. The widespread damage and outages affecting communications infrastructure left many people without stable access to the internet and cell service. Mayor Jeb Smathers of Canton, North Carolina said, quote, "People are walking the streets of Canton with their phones up in the air trying to catch a cell phone signal like it's a butterfly. Every single aspect of this response has been extremely crippled by a lack of cell phone communications. The one time we absolutely needed our cell phones to work, they failed," end of quote. Teams from Verizon worked to repair toppled cell towers and damaged cables and to provide alternate forms of connectivity, the company said in a statement. AT&T said it launched, quote, "one of the largest mobilizations of our disaster recovery assets for emergency connectivity support," end of quote. The efforts to restore service was made more challenging by the region's terrain and spread out population. That is according to David Zumwalt, president and CEO of the Association for Broadband Without Boundaries. Helene blew ashore on Friday late Thursday as a Category 4 hurricane and upended life throughout the southeast, with deaths reported in 6 states, Georgia, Florida, Tennessee, Virginia, in addition to the Carolinas. With at least 36 killed in South Carolina, Helene passed the 35 people who were killed in the state after Hurricane Hugo made landfall north of Charleston in 1989. When Lee, the Tennessee governor, flew to the eastern part of the state to survey damage Tuesday, residents said the governor and his entourage were the first help they had seen since the storm hit. One frustrated local asked, quote, "Where's everyone been? We have been here alone," end of quote. So it's a really dire matter for those people in the Carolinas and Tennessee. They were hit very, very hard. Virginia apparently as well. All right, so we'll keep an eye on the recovery efforts in those states. Right now, let's get to our next story. This is Sarah Leach writing at her Substack account. This is dated September 27th out of Ottawa County, Michigan. This is the story we teased you about last week. The Ottawa County Board of Commissioners approved the next budget for the county on Tuesday with little fanfare, with the exception of the removal of a $900,000 grant for the Public Health Department. The Ottawa Impact majority on the board, led by Chair Joe Moss, said the grant was a last-minute addition to the budget and that its COVID label was the state irresponsibly incentivizing taxpayer spending on a pandemic that is now over. Now, County Health Officer Adeline Hambley is setting the record straight. When the board discussed the issue at the top of the Tuesday evening agenda on September 24th, Moss said the grant was added about a week prior by the health department, a fact Hambley disputes. Hambley said, quote, "We submitted this grant as part of our budget proposal that was submitted in May," end of quote. Hambley said she met with Interim Administrator John Anderson and Fiscal Services staff in June or July to go over the department's budget, which included the infection prevention grant from the state. Hambley said, quote, "When we met with the administrator and Fiscal Services, we specifically talked about that grant. Usually the administrator would bring these things to the attention of the board, but I'm not sure if that happened here or not. Apparently, if they think it just came out last week, that doesn't seem like it did," end of quote. Hambley said she communicated with the appropriate counterparts in the county to provide all the information, and there were no concerns raised prior to the board's Tuesday discussion. Hambley said, quote, "I can say no questions or no concerns were ever brought to my attention throughout the whole process, and they weren't raised during any part of the budget review and our public meetings. So I wasn't in attendance at the board meeting last night to address anything. Just nothing was raised," end of quote. On Tuesday, Ottawa Impact Commissioner Gretchen Cosby, who is chair of the county's Health and Human Services Committee, restated claims first made in the summer of 2023 when she said she didn't get information she requested from the health department to better understand Hambley and her staff's work. Hambley said, quote, "Those metrics have been continually provided. When Gretchen wanted the metrics for all the county departments, we provided that. Even last week at Health and Human Services, I presented on the Communicable Disease Report and Gastrointestinal Illness Report and directed them to the Data and Statistics section of our website for additional reports and information. So I'm not sure where the whole metrics thing that she keeps bringing up that she hasn't gotten for 20 months. We've provided metrics like crazy," end of quote. On Tuesday, Moss said that approving the grant, even if the county didn't utilize the funds, would encourage the state to incentivize spending on COVID-19. During a discussion on the grant, Moss said, quote, "I understand the state would like to continue to incentive spending in this area. I don't think that we need to pre-plan to spend $900,000 on communicable diseases and COVID," end of quote. Hambley said that although the grant in question has the word COVID in its title, the funds can be used for any infection prevention activities and training. Hambley said, quote, "Ultimately, it's $900,000 for infection prevention activities, which are activities that we have to do and are mandated to do under the law. This allows us to offset some of the general fund county dollars. So I think it's a little bit disappointing that we don't get to offset our county general fund dollars, tax dollars, with this funding," end of quote. She explained that a unique aspect of the grant is that it could be used to cover department overhead costs, not just direct services. Hambley said, quote, "We have legally mandated work to prevent communicable disease spread and infections and outbreaks and everything else we have to do. This would just allow us to offset the cost to this grant because this grant is a little bit unique in that it allows us to charge county admin overhead costs to it, not just direct health department costs, which is a little unusual. Most grants don't allow us to do that, and so a lot of administration costs and health department administration costs can get offset when we can charge any of our time and activities that are directly related to infection prevention activities to this instead of to our general fund budget," end of quote. Moss renewed his claims that the state overstepped its legal authority during the pandemic when Governor Gretchen Whitmer and the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services issued COVID-19 mitigation measures that mandated masks in school and social distancing. That put Moss at odds with the Ottawa County Health Department after the private Christian school he founded in Hudsonville was shuttered briefly after staff didn't follow the mandates. Moss and Vice Chair Sylvia Rodea founded Ottawa Impact in 2021 over their frustrations with Whitmer's and MDHHS decisions that guided local decisions at the county health department. When Commissioner Doug Zylstra, a Democrat, suggested that it was wise to take the grant in case the county saw an unexpected outbreak of infectious disease, Moss pushed back. Zylstra said, quote, "There's no need to access this grant if we don't need the funds," end of quote. Moss replied, quote, "Why would we need to access a COVID grant?" End of quote. Zylstra said, quote, "We don't know. That's the whole point. If we don't need it, we don't need it." End of quote. Moss said, quote, "A cost for what? An emergency? The current budget covers that. They're fully funded. I'd rather not plan for another COVID emergency." End of quote. Yeah, but what happens if another COVID emergency plans for you there, Joey? You dumbass. I swear to God, Republican people are just absolutely dumb, and they want your children to be just as dumb as they are. That's why they cut funding at public schools. Period. End of story. Moss and Rodea went on to remind Zylstra of the 1,000-parent march he led in 2021 over the state's COVID-19 mitigation measures and, quote, "their reign of tyranny over the county." End of quote. Tyranny, really. The only tyranny I see going on in Ottawa County is under your leadership, Joe Moss. It's you. You are the tyrannist. You son of a bitch. Hambly said it's unfortunate the wide-ranging public health conversations at the board level seem to be stuck on COVID. She said, quote, "There's so many things on the horizon outside of COVID. There's always stuff, right? It's just the nature of people, diseases," end of quote. She pointed to Candida aureus, a fungal infection that causes severe multi-drug resistant illness in hospitalized patients. Cases have been reported in Michigan, but so far none in Ottawa County. She said, quote, "I think that's really important. The money is for preventing infection, not just responding to when we already have a large group of people impacted in a negative way. It's preventing that large group of people from being negatively impacted in the first place," end of quote. Hambly said it's short-sighted to not have a plan for health emergencies. Quote, "The goal is to prevent the serious consequence. We're doing on a community level what doctors try to do on a patient level. The doctors try to manage diabetic symptoms so they don't have to have their feet amputated," end of quote. Despite Moss and Rodea claiming that they were saving taxpayer dollars by not accepting the grant from the state, Hambly said the health department has a legal obligation to respond to any health outbreaks and that the money will now come from the county's general fund and will not be offset by the offered additional funding. She said, quote, "All it means is that we'll be expending general fund dollars rather than these other grant dollars for our activities and our duties that exceed what's budgeted. If there were a large-scale event, we would need to do a budget adjustment that would go before the board," end of quote. Moss said the department could go before the board if it needed additional funding in the event of an emergency. Hambly said that the board would then, quote, "have that level of control. However, there are requirements and laws for the health officer to respond to public health emergencies and public health events, and that can't be hamstrung by funding," end of quote. She also remained skeptical that requests from her department would be handled promptly and appropriately after several funding requests went ignored during Hambly's year-long lawsuit against the board after the OI commissioners attempted to improperly demote and fire Hambly. In February, the two parties settled the lawsuit with Hambly remaining in her role and the county paying her more than $188,000 for her legal fees. Hambly said, quote, "Requests that we've made before to the board this past year for additional funding have not been approved and have not been expeditious. There are concerns with how speedy it would be in front of them and considered in the event of an emergency," end of quote. During its meeting Tuesday, the board voted 6-4 to reject the grant and approve the budget without it. Hambly said it's possible that the funding could still be there next year when a new set of incoming commissioners likely will lead to OI losing its majority on the board. However, she said there are no guarantees. Quote, "We can always go back and ask the state to amend the contract with us. Now, that doesn't mean that they'll have the funding available to give us, but we can ask at a future date. It's not a guarantee that it's there." End of quote. So there you hear it, folks. Right there. If another, let me just succinctly tell you this way. If there's another public emergency in Ottawa County regarding the health department, the Ottawa County Impact Board of Commissioners don't give a f*** about you. In the words of Carlin, they don't give a f*** about you. They don't care about you at all. At all. It's really that simple, folks. Joe Moss, Sylvia Rodea, Gretchen Cosby, and the other ilk there at Ottawa Impact do not give a f*** about the people of Ottawa County. They should be voted out of office. Personally, up to me, I'd have them in the unemployment line for the rest of their lives. They never work again anywhere. All right, let's get to our next story here. This is David Bowder writing for the Associated Press. This is dated October 1st out of New York City. CBS News said Tuesday that Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump has declined to participate in an interview with 60 Minutes for his election special, which will go forward next Monday with Democratic opponent Kamala Harris alone. Television's top-rated news program regularly invites the two presidential contenders for separate interviews that air back-to-back on a show near the election. This year it is scheduled for Monday instead of its usual Sunday time slot. As for comment, Donald Trump's spokesman Stephen Chung said, quote, "fake news," end of quote, adding that they were in discussions but nothing was ever locked in. Yeah, really. Yeah. 60 Minutes said Trump's campaign had initially agreed to an interview before telling CBS that Trump would not appear. The network said its invitation to sit for an interview still stands, and correspondent Scott Pelley will explain Trump's absence to viewers. Vice President Harris will appear in a pre-taped interview with Bill Whitaker. There are currently no other scheduled opportunities for voters to compare the two candidates together. Harris and Trump previously debated on September 10th. Although Harris has accepted an invitation from CNN for a second debate later this month, Trump has not accepted. The interview special is scheduled to air Monday instead of the usual 60 Minutes time slot because CBS is showing the American Music Awards on Sunday. Chung said 60 Minutes insisted upon doing live fact-checking for the interview, quote, "which is unprecedented," end of quote. No, it ain't! No, it ain't! Just look at past interviews, folks. Donald Trump and Stephen Chung are liars. They are lying to you. CBS had no immediate comment for the claim. Trump's interview with 60 Minutes correspondent Leslie Stahl prior to the 2020 election proved contentious, with Trump ending the session early in his campaign posting an unedited transcript of the session. CBS News hosted Tuesday's vice presidential debate between JD Vance and Tim Walz, so we know that. All right, let's get to our final story here. This is the Associated Press writing out of Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. This is dated October 1st. 3 residents of a northeastern Pennsylvania county sued Tuesday to overturn a local official's announcement that she will prevent all 4 of its drop boxes from being deployed for use by those voting by mail and absentee ballot in the November 5th election. The lawsuit in Luzerne County argues County Manager Romilda Crocamo lacks authority for statements made last month that the county would not use drop boxes, quote, because of purported safety and security concerns, end of quote. Drop boxes are used to hand over completed ballots by those who don't want to put mail-in ballots through the mail. The voters who sued said the Luzerne County Board of Elections and Registration plans to deploy 4 drop boxes as it has in other recent elections. The board in February voted down a proposal to eliminate all drop boxes, their lawsuit states. The lawsuit accuses Crocamo of violating state election law, and it claims her policy will, quote, lead to irreparable harm to the voting rights, end of quote, in Luzerne. The plaintiffs want a county judge to stop Crocamo from implementing the decision. In an email seeking comment, Crocamo wrote Tuesday, quote, I do not engage in public comment during litigation, end of quote. Messages seeking comment were left with 2 of the 5 members of the Elections and Registration Board, which is also a defendant in the case. Nicolle Wallace, legal director of the ACLU of Pennsylvania, said in a statement that Crocamo had no authority for what he called, quote, an end run around the Board of Elections' decision to continue offering Luzerne County voters a safe and easy option to vote by mail, and we hope the court will quickly restore the 4 boxes, end of quote. The voters and the nonprofit civic group In This Together NEPA Incorporated, which also is a plaintiff, argued that there have been no substantiated cases of abuse or fraud involving drop boxes in Luzerne County. They said the drop boxes have been monitored by camera. The Times leader of Wilkes-Barre reported Tuesday that Crocamo has said she does have the authority as part of her duty to oversee personnel and the security of county-owned properties. To that I say this. Bullshit! There you go, lady. Oh, my God, these Republicans, I can't stand them. One other quick thing I want to mention here. After the debate on Tuesday between JD Vance and Tim Walz, MSNBC hosts Nicolle Wallace and Rachel Maddow both accused JD Vance of mansplaining his way through a fact check at the vice presidential debate. Vance got into a heated exchange with CBS News debate moderator Margaret Brennan when she offered a fact check about the city of Springfield, Ohio. Vance's comments were originally in response to Tim Walz blasting him for spreading a false story about Haitian migrants eating family pets in Springfield, Ohio, something that's been debunked by city and state officials. Vance discussed issues stemming from illegal immigration on the southern border, and Brennan noted, quote, just to clarify for our viewers, Springfield, Ohio does have a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status, temporary protected status, end of quote. Vance accused Brennan of breaking the rules, though there was no rule saying there would be no fact checks, only one stating that the debate moderators would only fact check if they deem it necessary. Vance's mic was then cut as he discussed streamlined processes for illegal immigrants to receive temporary legal status. And he talked right over it. Talked right over them. In post-election coverage on MSNBC, Wallace said it was likely Vance's worst moment for women, claiming his plan was to mansplain over the muted mic, disrespecting the moderators. Here's what she said, quote, I actually think that if you're a woman, that might be the worst moment JD Vance had because he was going to mansplain right over that mute button. He was, and again, I don't pretend to know how everyone will react to this. I think that a lot of women in positions of authority that should command respect just by virtue of that dynamic will see themselves and some dude that disrespected them and talked over them. End of quote. And that's Nicolle Wallace saying this. She's a Republican. Conservative Republican. I just have this to say in wrapping things up. For those of you that want to vote for Donald Trump, that want to put a dictator in place, let me just say, go to Russia, go to North Korea, go to Iran, go to Cuba. I'll help you pack. Get the hell out of this country because this country is for democracy, not for dictators. That's it for this week. I'm Darren Gibson. Please support independent media, the First Amendment, and a woman's right to choose.
The stations that carry Southpaws do not necessarily share the opinions expressed on the show. Southpaws is protected by the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and is copyrighted by Big D Entertainment. All rights reserved.